I'm the facilitator of the event. I'm Renata Mansini from University of Brescia. I'm also a member of Euro Wisdom as chair of the subcom event. We will have today 3 speakers, I hope. We are still waiting for one of the participants. And we have here a special guest today, which is our expert in terms of city logistics and smart mobility. That is Michel Gendreau. Michel is already connected, as you can see. Okay, first of all, some etiquette before starting, just telling you what is Euro Wisdom. Etiquette, please keep your microphone closed and until it is your turn to speak. And please notice that the webinar will be recorded. So before starting, some words about Euro Wisdom. I'm sure that you know Wisdom Forum is one of the 3 forums of Euro. In particular, it provides a platform to support, empower, and encourage the participations of all genders in operational research within Euro. In particular, we promote inclusivity, and there is here a list of action that are important for us. In particular, we advise and make recommendations and highlight best practice, especially for executive, on issues regarding women in OR that in OR face. We also promote championing, networking, and mentoring, in particular for young women, as it is the case of today. And we promote conversations around how OR can be used to help create a diverse and inclusive future. You can have a look to our Euro AD policy on our Euro website. Just a few words about Young Women for OR. As you can see, these are the 2021 awardees, 12 girls coming from all parts of Europe. And today, as a matter of fact, our idea is to put the focus on the results and research results of 3 of these girls. In particular, the 3 persons are, the name of the 3 persons are highlighted in bold, if you can see. We have Julia Lange from the University of, difficult to say, Kaiserslautern, Germany. Then we have Layla Martin, Eindhoven University of Technology in Netherlands, and Philine Schiewe of Technical University of the same place, very difficult to say, Philine. Kaiserslautern is still in German. So I have already presented the 3 speakers, but of course we also have our expert, and you know very well Michel. You know him, and probably it's not necessary to present him. I tell you, I had a very hard time yesterday in trying to squeeze these all his CV in this limited number of lines. But let me briefly tell that he has published about 400 papers in different contexts, like transportations and logistics system planning and operation, energy production, storage, healthcare, telecommunication, a lot of different subjects. Michel was a director of CIRELT and served also as editor-in-chief of Transportation Science. He was a former president of Operational Research Society in Canada, and he played the role of vice president for different times, indeed, of IFORS and also of Informs. I cannot put all a long list of awards he got and he received in his life. I just put the emphasis on the prestigious award, the Robert Herman Lifetime Achievement Award of the Transportation Science and Logistics Society of Informs. Let me briefly, before start presenting the girls, I just want to tell something which is related also to my past. When I was a PhD student, as they are this young girl or at the beginning of early career stage, I have to say that Michel was really a role model for me. Then I had the opportunity, and I would also say the pleasure to know him in person. And so I discover how special a person he is from different point of view. This is just to tell you that essentially we are a scientific community, But this is not the only aspect. We are also person in our diversity and in our, let's say, similarities. So this is indeed the focus of our Wisdom Forum. So we may start if Julia is not arrived yet, right? So we may start with Layla. Layla, I give you the floor. Please, just in case, tell us about your positions, the actual position in which university you are working now. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you. Then I can take over screen sharing. Here we go. Okay, you should now be able to see this screen.
Yes, we can.
So with my PowerPoint presentation. And yeah, so just a few words about myself. So I'm Layla. I'm an assistant professor for transport and logistics at Technical University in Eindhoven. I've been here for almost 2 years now. Before that, I did my PhD at the Technical University in Munich, and which is also where I, like, more or less where I grew up. I grew up a little bit outside of Munich. And yeah, so I started working on vehicle sharing in the beginning. I'm now doing, let's say, a lot of different stuff that has to do with transport and logistics. And yeah, so very quickly, what I'm going to present today is a very, very early stage work, but I thought for 10 minutes, it's better to present something where I don't have too many results yet. I might make it easier to fit it into 10 minutes. So this is, it's joint work with Huyen Mak at Georgetown University. And what we're looking into is how autonomous mobility on demand systems can use the street network, gain knowledge about the street network, and also share knowledge about the street network. So the very high level background behind this is we're seeing robotaxis, we're seeing autonomous mobility on demand systems happening all over the world. And some people are very, very optimistic about it, saying they're taking over China's roads. A lot of companies try to bring them to the market, but on the other hand, there's growing concerns about the fact that they're just burning money, about the fact that they cause traffic jams, about the fact that road safety is still an issue with autonomous mobility. And yeah, so how autonomous the road safety of these vehicles is usually being tackled is that they have some maps. So for instance, this car knows that in here has to expect some potholes, it has to expect this and that, which means it can focus its attention to recognizing the spike, which was of course not there last time they this car traveled through here. Yeah, so this is also, let's say, on a very high level, what we want to do. We want to know, okay, how can we route vehicles and also have this mapping process? So we have a fleet of vehicles and we want to determine how we're routing them to balance, on the one hand side, having sufficiently short routes, and on the other hand, having sufficient knowledge. So the basic idea is this. So let's just say we have a customer here on the right. So there's someone showing up here, but right now they cannot travel down here because we don't have any knowledge about this arc. We don't have any knowledge about this arc, which would mean that they would have to drive so extremely, extremely slow that it just doesn't make sense to drive at all. So this person just uses an outside option and goes directly. But now if another customer who goes from the red dot to the red dot uses this path, this arc becomes learned. So there's additional road knowledge, and then the other person can actually also drive here, because then there's only a small part that is not known. So there's only a small section where the car has to drive quite slow. So this also works in this case. So this is the very, very basic concept. We're balancing the routing with the knowledge of the street. So what do we have in this model? We have customers which give us revenue, but which also have a maximum willingness when it comes to travel time. We have paths, which is practically origin destination pairs with arcs connecting them. And we have some knowledge of those streets, or we're lacking the knowledge of the streets. Our decision problem is very simple. We want to route customers from an origin to a destination along a predefined set of paths such that their travel time of the entire path does not exceed the maximum accepted travel time, utilizing joint learning effects on shared arcs. So we're looking at the fleet perspective, not the individual vehicle perspective, and our objective is to maximize profits. So we also have a mathematical model, but given the timing, I won't bore you with the details. But instead, we're just going to look into one example. So we have a network with 50 nodes, which you can see here. We have 76 arcs. So this is the direct connections that we're having in here, and we have 29 customers with a demand of 2, 3, 5, or 7 predefined paths, and a demand between 2 and 10. So for instance, the red node could be the origin and the blue node could be the destination of one customer. And then this customer has these 3 paths as alternatives. Or if we have 7 paths, it might be these ones here. So the important part is that they're cycle-free and that they're all sufficiently short that it would in theory be feasible to travel along them. And then we have a learning effect. So we have this, first of all, we look at the steady state. So we say, okay, what we learned in the previous period is now actually our knowledge. We forget a little bit about that. And then depending on how much we drove in the previous period, this is what we gain in knowledge. So Z is sort of our knowledge, and then our travel time along an arc is just minimum travel time divided by the knowledge of the street, which is a value between 0 and 1. It's very, very high level, the problem that we're solving. And then we have quite a lot of these. We look at some slightly different instances, and in particular, so we vary the factor beta in here, so how well we learn, and we also vary how many paths we permit. And we find a few things that I found relatively surprising, some other things that we more or less expected. So what we relatively expected from the beginning onwards is that the better the system learns, the fewer alternatives paths we need. So we very quickly reach a relatively high profit, and then it doesn't make a difference if we have 3 or 7 paths available. Vice versa, if we have a lot of paths, we can reach high service level as well as profits without having too good learning. So for instance, these are just 2 instances. This is an instance with just 1 path, and this is an instance with 7 paths. And the thickness of the lines describes how many vehicles use this. So you just see a lot more vehicles are actually traveling in this example as compared to that, which also really shows that a lot more origin destination pairs, a lot more customers are being served. Now, of course, the issue is that a few of these customers have to do very, very, very drastic detours, which they're usually not very willing to do. So we looked at user equilibrium. So we said, okay, passengers choose their path. We use this here as a starting point, and then we just look via best responses what the user equilibrium is that is the closest to this state. And we found a few things that we find rather surprising and of course also rather negative for this system. So the equilibrium can deteriorate if we're having more paths, and the equilibrium can also deteriorate if the system learns better. So learning better should not make the system worse off. Having more alternatives should not make the system worse off. But of course, I mean, everyone who's knows a little bit about wardrobe equilibria, Brass paradoxon, these kind of things is most likely not very surprised by this. But of course, it's something that is relatively problematic, and which is exactly what we're going to tackle next, but which we haven't tackled just yet. But I wanted to quickly show you what happens here in this dark blue line. So why it actually happens that sometimes we have a 0. So here on the left, you find the solution of the equilibrium, and here on the right, so this is with the worst learning rate, and then we look at the slightly better learning rate. This is the solution, not of the equilibrium, but of the social optimum. And then what happens here is that over time, a lot of these arcs, so right now it's happening down here a lot, are dropping, because all of a sudden we don't, those paths are no longer viable until we have 0. And so we have not tackled this yet, but this is what we're going to tackle next, which is looking into pricing for detours, that we offer some users some profits to ensure that the equilibrium, that the social optimum is actually also an equilibrium. So this is something that we're currently still working on. But what we already showed is that it is possible to capture a learning effect in autonomous mobility demand on a system level. And what we also showed is that this equilibrium can be harmful and unpredictable, and which means that there is a need for coordination. I'm not sure if I still have some time. In this case, I would very quickly open the floor for questions. Otherwise, I would immediately hand over to Philine as the next speaker.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Layla. You are in perfect time. So I will give the floor to, I think that Julia is arrived. So I think now is time for Julia and then for Philine. So Julia, please share your presentation.
Yes, of course. So I'm pretty sorry for not being here earlier. Internet connection problems always appear when you definitely should not have them. But yeah, I hope
Julia,
everything
just
will
in case,
be fine.
Before starting, just tell us what is your current position.
Sure. Yeah, maybe I can directly use this slide to do this. So yeah, my name is Julia Lange. I am a postdoc at the Technical University of Kaiserslautern. So I'm working with Timo Gschwind there. And right now, it's actually my pleasure to be in Montreal visiting our collaborators, Theodor Kreinig and Walter Rey, with whom we are doing this project together that I would like to present to you today. So this little 10 minutes talk is about planning scheduled services on multimodal synchronized city logistics systems. So this is a project we started, I think, about 1 year ago. So I would like to give you some insights on what we have done so far, what are our experiences, and what's the future direction. So I hope you can see the screen, but I have not yet got any complaints. So, okay, perfect. All right, so this is a situation I think all of you know. So our cities nowadays are flooded by delivery or pickup activities. So we have vehicles there, we have storage places there, we have people actually doing these deliveries. And I think it's clear to all of us that in the future, we cannot continue increasing the resources or increasing storage places and stuff like this. We need to focus on using the resources we have, using the infrastructure that is there more efficiently to cope with the increasing amount of these delivery and pickup actions that take place. Our idea to do this is a two-tier city logistics system. So this is something you can observe in many cities already, that multimodal transport is a future direction. We are thinking here about a city having an external zone, which is less dense with regard to the population. So in these zones, you can actually use trucks for deliveries or for freight carrying. And we do even think about using rail-based transportation, so like trains or trams that have spare capacities to use them also to move some freight. In our inner city area, in most of the cases, we do not want these big vehicles there. So we think about cargo bikes, autonomous vehicles going there, electric vehicles, so just smaller ones. and which brings us to the fact that we have these handover points, which are denoted by these red triangles here, that are our satellites where freight is handed over from one mode to another. The two main ideas we would like to focus on in this project are resource sharing, at most as much as possible, which means that we want to integrate all three directions of demand flow. So E to C into the city, C to E out of the city, and C to C. And we would like to follow a transportation as a service idea. So we do not want the system to be from one carrier only. We would like to integrate several carriers so that you have the option as a logistics service provider to actually say, okay, tomorrow I have these two tours already planned. There are spare capacities, so you can choose to use them or not to use them. So this idea should also be integrated. And as I said, we do not want even more facilities to open. We would like to have storage facility, handover locations without storage capacity, which means that these vehicles directly need to meet to hand over the demands so that this space can be used for other purposes only if there is no demand handover taking place. From a solving point of view or from a modeling point of view also, this leads us to the necessity of exact synchronization. So if these vehicles need to meet, we need to synchronize the tours and focus on the timing of these systems. And methodologically speaking, we are considering here a path-based model approach. So the tours, the routes for the vehicles are given on both tiers, and we decide to use them or not to use them, and focus on the timing then. So for the inner part, we have some more characteristics to consider. So our customer locations have maximum waiting times. Our tours have a route, as I said. Fixed costs are so far measured as the travel time, and they have capacities. And our demands have different types, different origin, destination, a volume, a handover time, and time windows as well. On the outer tier, on the second tier, we have these services that are also coming with a route, and we have fixed costs for them. What is special here is that these costs are not only measured in travel time, but also with a so-called flexibility factor. These services have a start time window. So especially if you think about rail-based transport, you can imagine there are also other trains going on the same infrastructure. So you only have time windows in which you can actually start your service. And the more flexible this should be, so the bigger these start time windows are, the higher are the costs. I think you can also easily imagine a logistics service provider telling you, okay, if you take the departure at 9, the costs are smaller than if you want a flexible departure between 9 and 12. Our satellite locations have capacities, of course, that might come in spatial units like square meters or in a precise number of vehicles, and we have a maximum waiting time there as well. So we do not want infinitely many vehicles parking everywhere in our city. Then we also figured out some more instance characteristics that affect the solving process a lot. And these are also the characteristics we use for the instance generation. So we can set a number of customers, the demand type distribution. So it affects the instance dependent on what's the amount of flow and what is the direction. There is an effect whether you deal with trucks or trams, especially with regard to the satellite capacity restrictions. And then we also have characteristics like the satellite density. So we saw that, okay, the proportion between the number of customers and the number of satellites you have in an instance can make this instance easier or harder to solve. The same holds for the instance density, which is the overall time horizon over which the time windows are actually distributed. The time window length and the customer waiting time policies are kind of measures of flexibility. The tighter they are, the less planning flexibility you have. Sometimes this is an advantage, sometimes it is not. And feasibility is a big issue, especially in the instance generation. So these are so far the parameters with which we try to play around to get different instances for these complex planning problems. What is our optimization problem then? So we want to assign demands to services and tours and select the starting times of these at each of their stops so that our operating costs and the waiting times of the vehicles are minimal. From the mathematical model that actually can be explained in pages of papers, I only brought our decision variables, showing you that for each inbound or outbound demand, we are having a 0-1 decision, assigning this demand to a pair of a service and a tour that meet at a specific satellite to hand over this demand. And we have these continuous starting time variables for the stages of the services or the legs of the tours. That leads us to a model that is a fusion between an assignment and a scheduling problem. And we actually made the decision to go with these types of variables to already have a look at the methodology we want to apply. So this will definitely lead us to a decomposition approach in the future. Here I also brought you a little schedule, a little solution of our instances. So we can see our small example here again, 6 customers, 3 satellites and 2 distribution centers. We have 2 red services that are chosen. So the red lines are the outer tier vehicles and the blue lines are the inner tier vehicles. So we can see, for example, a cargo bike goes on tour number 1 without any handover in the beginning. So it starts empty, it picks up a demand number 2, and then it ends at satellite number 5. Here it waits some time until also tour number 5 arrives there. And then these 2 demands, 2 and 5, are handed over to this service. So this is the structure of the solutions we get in the end. A big issue we are still facing with our model that is also due to this synchronization aspect is waiting times and satellite capacities and how to express and address them. So we can see here 2 tours and 1 service meeting, and these continuous variables do actually determine these black bars right here. So how do we make sure that the vehicles actually meet? What we do is we define these handover intervals that are the green bars, and we make sure that the service is also present at the start of the first handover interval, and it is present until the end of the last handover interval. And now the big question arises, how do I detect or how do I define the latest time the service needs to depart from the satellite with regard to its maximum waiting time there? And for this, what we do is we are getting an estimate of the total handover time taking place. So we are summing up the lengths of these intervals and adding the maximum waiting time to come up with the latest possible point in time this vehicle is allowed to be present. This works perfectly fine in the situation I have shown here, where these handovers are taking place after one another. If you have a situation like this, where these handovers are actually taking place in parallel, which might well be the case in practice, then our estimate actually overestimates the actual handover time, and we kind of get more waiting time allowance that we want to get. And this is still an issue we are working on. And what you actually might come up with is the idea of introducing time indexed variables, which needs a time discretization. So far, we do not really want to go with that, but probably we need to at some point, or get a hybrid model at least. The same issue happens for the satellite capacities. So in this case, you can easily say it's always 2 vehicles there. But in the case on the right-hand side, if handovers are overlapping, you need to detect that at this point in time, there are actually 3 vehicles present. So that so far, the satellite capacities are a post-optimization analysis for us. So far, we exclude them from the original model. And detect some conflicts afterwards. And in the near future, we want to actually tackle these capacities also within the solving process. So this is our current work going on. So our first results we have are obtained based on
Julia,
data.
we have just 1 minute left.
Yeah, I'm finishing soon. So our current computational study is on some data from the city of Karlsruhe, so a region with 21,000 inhabitants. Customer locations are taken from these areas. And we have 10 road-based satellites divided into 2 regions and 4 rail-based satellites that could be there. So for the road-based satellites, we observed instances with a different number of satellites, but making sure that the regions are covered. In a sense, for the rail-based, we just go with these 4. Our main conclusions that we draw from the computational results is that considering general MIP solving as part of the solution process seems reasonable, since instances of reasonable size can be solved in seconds or minutes. Satellite capacity restrictions need to be considered explicitly from the very beginning, since they occur, so conflicts occur even for pretty small instances already. Going with a repair scheme seems reasonable, since the number of conflicts is quite small so far. And we will also consider the demand characteristics a bit more in the route generation, so to improve consolidation. So our future research will be on the repair scheme, of course. We want to add cuts with time indexed variables, so get a hybrid model in a sense. I would like to put this instance generation open source at some point, so that all of you will be able to use it, because I think these complex instances, the generation is a work at itself. And then we would also like to go for some mass heuristics and stochastics in the future. All right, so with this, I would like to thank you and hand over.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for your nice presentation. So I give the floor to the last person, that is Philine. Philine, can you share your perfect?
Yes.
Let's see if we can see your screen. Perfect.
So you should be able to see it.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Yes, I also wanted to start where I'm at the moment. So until October, I also was in Kaiserslautern together, or at the same university as Julia in a sense. And now just in November, I started a new position as an assistant professor at the Aalto University. So I'm in Finland now. Yes, and I'm also going to talk about mobility or transportation, and it's a little bit more old school than Layla's approach. It's public transport. The good thing about public transport is that passengers are bundled, so we can transport more passengers with less vehicles and hopefully also not so much impact on the environment. But this, of course, depends on the quality of the transport supply that we have. And I'm going to talk today about line planning, but as an integrated problem. So I hope you have a good intuition for what line planning actually is. So we're looking for line plans like this one here. We want to have paths where vehicles travel and which can be traveled also by passengers from one end to the other end without having to transfer somewhere. And this is a problem that is very well researched. there are a lot of different perspectives to look at this, some from the passenger side, some from the operator side. And yes, it's quite old. There are some heuristic, meta-heuristic approaches and some exact methods. Many of the optimization approaches assume that there is some kind of line pool given. So there's a set of lines from which we choose, and then we only determine which lines we operate and at which frequencies. However, today we are looking at the problem for a non-pool based approach. So we say that all possible paths will be allowed as lines, and we then try to find exact approaches with a cost perspective in mind. So how does this look like a little bit more formally? We have a public transport network, which is just a graph. You can imagine the nodes to be stations and the edges to be connections between them. So yeah, it can be roads or tracks. And then a line is a simple path in this PTN. And keep in mind, we allow any of them as a line. And then we want to find a line concept. This is a set of lines and corresponding frequencies. A frequency determines how often this line is operated during our planning period. And we want to fulfill some frequency constraints. Here, each edge has two numbers, a lower bound and an upper bound. And we want to have that the frequency of all lines passing this edge is between the lower and the upper bound. And we want to do this by minimizing the costs. And the costs depend on the number of different lines we have. So these are so-called frequency independent costs and a frequency dependent part. So here we are having costs for each line and multiplying by the frequency. The nice thing about public transport networks is they can be quite complex and have a lot of circles, but often they're actually not. So for example, here in Helsinki, this is a slightly older picture, but the transport network is actually just a tree. And there are even examples where it's a path. So this gives us hope that looking at easy graphs or easy graph classes and find optimal solution approaches there will actually help in practice later on. And therefore, we looked at the complexity of these problems depending on the cost structure. So if we have frequency independent costs or not, for different graph classes. And I worked on this already quite some time ago and had some first results. First of all, it's in general, of course, it's an NP-hard problem. But if we have no frequency independent costs, it can be easy for very easy graph classes, stars and path. And this year, together with two colleagues, Irene Heinrich and Konstantin Seebach, we worked on understanding this problem much better. And we found out that if we have frequency independent costs, it becomes NP-hard extremely fast. So even on stars and on path, so the easiest kind of network you can think of, it's NP-hard. But if we don't have these frequency independent costs, we can improve the star algorithm to be a polynomial one, and we find pseudo-polynomial and polynomial algorithms for trees. And this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. So first of all, let's have a look at stars. And we try to understand why we can find an optimal solution in polynomial time. And therefore, we have an easy observation. So we want to minimize the costs over this network. And we only have two types of lines. Either lines connect two different edges, or they only present of one edge, because they have to be path, and in the star there can't be any other lines. And this means that we can always find an optimal solution where each edge is covered exactly as often as the minimal requirement here. Because if that is not the case, as here, we can take the line that covers the edge that is covered by more often than it has to be and cut one of the lines and get rid of a part, and the costs can never be higher than before. And then the minimization problem becomes easier. Instead of optimizing over this rather complex looking cost function, we are just minimizing the total frequency of one edge lines. And this gives us optimality conditions. So if there is no one edge line, it's obviously optimal. Fewer we can't have. If there's one line with one edge that has also frequency 1, it also has to be optimal. That is the odd case in a sense. And then we have one further case. If there's an edge that has to be covered more often than all others together, this means this edge has to be in every line that we serve. And this more or less immediately gives us a solution algorithm that is in fact polynomial. We start by sorting our edges by decreasing a minimal frequency constraint. And then we're solving this problem iteratively for a restricted graph. So first for the first edge and then the second and so on. So if we have a solution for the first k edges, we now have to get to an optimal solution for the first k+1 edges. And this is possible because we are in the case where we have no frequency independent costs. We can add this new edge by splitting any existing two-edge line and combining it with the new edge that we have. And then in the end, we again end up with one of the optimality conditions and can repeat this until we have looked at every edge. And luckily, we can use this idea to solve a special case for trees. So if on a tree, we already know that each edge has to be covered, how often each edge has to be covered exactly, then we can just apply our algorithm for each inner vertex once. So first for this star and then for this star. And now instead of merging two edges to a line, we are merging two lines together and get an overall solution like this. This unfortunately does not work anymore if we have any edge where if we have edges where the lower and the upper bound are not the same. So this example here can have two different optimal solutions depending on the cost structure. Either each edge is covered, as here, the edge here is covered 2 times the minimal frequency constraint, or it is less expensive to use this edge more often and instead using fewer lines in total, then this solution here could be optimal. So it's no longer as easy anymore. We still in this paper I talked about created a dynamic program that can solve this problem, working on a bounded frequency constraint and working with constructing the tree that we are looking in a specific way so that we always know how the costs are. And currently we are still working on this problem. We are now quite sure that we even found a polynomial time algorithm for trees. So this dynamic program is pseudo-polynomial, but we think we can improve it to a polynomial one. And we are also looking at exact polynomial algorithms for cycles in the hope that we then combine these two ideas to get a parameterized algorithm, for example, for this parametric city graph, which is quite good representation of really general city networks, or for ring graphs that we also look at sometimes. And we would like to take the algorithm I sketched a little bit for trees, so this dynamic program, and extend it to a parameterized algorithm for bounded tree widths. So, but let us take one step back. Is the problem we are solving here with nice algorithms actually the problem we are looking at? Maybe we want to solve, and maybe it's not quite the problem we would like to solve, because line planning does not really stand on its own. It's part of this optimization in public transport, and there are a lot of other steps coming after line planning. So, for example, building a timetable and then finding the actual vehicle schedule. And the true costs for the operators are only known after the vehicle schedule is really fixed, because this determines how many vehicles we are needing and how much empty traveling of the vehicles is also needed. So the costs can get much higher than estimated in line planning. And therefore, it would actually be a good idea to look at line planning and vehicle scheduling in an integrated manner, if possible, of course, in an exact approach. But so far, we have some heuristic ideas here. And we have a model that is combining these two problems and then is related to the classical vehicle routing problems that we know. And therefore, we can also use some of the heuristic solution approaches there to find solutions for this integrated problem. And this idea actually helps us to find solutions on close to real-world instances where we outperform the classical approach of solving problems sequentially after one another. And this solution here that is part of our software project Lintim, that is it's a set of algorithms for different planning stages and of data sets. And the idea is to actually evaluate public transport plannings in context. So not just looking at line planning, but looking at the line planning in the context of timetabling and vehicle scheduling, for example, as well. This has been started by Renata Schiewe in 2007, so it's 15 years now. And I started working in this project as well in, I think, 2012 or 13. And I was quite involved in making it an open source problem 5 years ago. So you can have a look at this project if you want to. You can check it out. It's a Git. And this project now also moved with me to Aalto University. So we hopefully quite soon have moved the website and everything as well. And thank you very much. That was my input for today.
Thank you, Philine, for your presentation. Very nice results. So now we have not exactly the scheduled time as I was assuming at the beginning, 10 minutes for our expert, just to give us some, let's say, future perspective, your perspective on future challenges, Michel, and just highlight the contribution of our young women. Thank you, Michel. The floor is yours.
Okay, maybe the first thing that I would like to mention is that I think we have a very nice, I would say, range of problems described in those 3 talks. Different issues, different ways of addressing mobility problems. I must say that it's a bit difficult for me to comment, for example, on Julia's work, because I think that as far as I can see, she's probably sitting now in a room in Cyril. So it's I somehow when I saw her name on the list of participants, said, oh, this sounds kind of familiar. And obviously, this is work which is done with 2 of my very frequent co-authors, César Koenig and Walter Rey, among others. So this whole work on, I would say, two-tier logistical systems, trying to bring stuff from outside, inside cities using different types of vehicles. And I think that one thing that appears quite obviously in Julia's talk is the importance of synchronization issues. So I would say this is quite in line with my own experience on similar problems. And currently, for example, I'm doing another project where we're looking at just delivery issues, just simple delivery issues in using different types of vehicles, where again, we have this issue of having large vehicles outside and, for example, bikes inside. And the key thing is, how do we synchronize vehicles and satellites? So I think that this is something when we are using multimodal transportation that always comes up. Besides that, it was very nice to see Layla's talk. And I must say that Layla, coming from TU Eindhoven, I mean, this summer I had the pleasure of hosting a PhD student from TU Eindhoven, and this is one among a long list of visitors. And for some odd reason, I don't know why, but I think that all of them have been women. I cannot remember of one of those visitors being a man. All women PhD students, including people, some names you might recognize, like Ola Jabali, who's now in Polytechnico di Milano. She was a PhD student who visited in Cyril and then came back as a postdoc. And maybe I can do a little bit of advertising at this time, which is the fact that I am always very happy to host visitors. So if you want to come to Montreal for 2, 3, 4 months, I will always find time and an office for you. So this I can guarantee. So going back to Layla's work, I think this is very intriguing, this thing about those driverless taxis, and I think the issues that come up there are issues that were not really used to work on. I think this raises a host of new questions. And maybe one question that I have is that, as far as I understood, what has been presented by Layla today is that we just assume that we have time-independent travel times for the different edges. And I would say, and I think this would apply to pretty much all of the talks this morning, one thing that has been a lot in my mind over the last few years is this whole issue of time-dependent travel times. Time-dependent travel times in all kinds of environments, but when we are in cities, it's certainly an issue. Another issue that I would well, there's obviously the question of so just time dependency, but also I have a question for Layla, which is about what about congestion? Because you assume that you have some kind of user equilibrium that develops. I must say that in a former life, I've worked on those user equilibrium issues, and it's clear that congestion is at stake. And what happens with those nice autonomous taxis if we have congestion issues?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. It's an interesting trade-off. If you say, okay, you have on the one hand side, if you put a little bit more vehicles on the road, you learn better, but of course congestion gets worse. So we have not looked into that, but as I said, it was very early stage, but I think it would be very interesting to say, okay, our travel time function is actually not even monotonous anymore, but we say, okay, up to a certain point it gets better and then it gets worse again. Which of course also depends on how many vehicles you actually have on the street. So I think in an early phase, most likely it won't matter that much. If we're talking about, let's say, 500 autonomous vehicles in a bigger city, but as soon as we're talking about autonomous vehicles actually taking over the roads, then yes, definitely congestion will matter a lot more.
Okay, and I would like also to highlight Philine's talks. I think those network design issues on a structural basis are extremely interesting, trying to develop some kind of insight on what might be the proper structures to work on. So, so those structural problems are interesting because I think they give us the opportunity to have some insight in what type of structures. And I know that, for example, my colleague Gilbert Laporte has worked extensively on developing some papers related to those kind of structural problems, different types of radial networks or pseudo radial and whatever. And I don't think that this type of work gives directly answers to practical problems, but I think it can be a very useful guide. And I fully agree with the idea that if you really want to work on transit network design, somehow you need to integrate, I would say, later stages of the planning up to vehicle scheduling to be able to get the real answers. So that's certainly something which is very interesting. So I have about 2 minutes left to sell my favorite stuff, which is stochastics. I think that all those problems are extremely interesting, but it's clear that dealing with uncertainty issues at various levels, whether this is demand, whether it's line performance or things like that, is extremely important. And when you're looking at uncertainty issues, for those who have seen some of my talks maybe on stochastic vehicle routing, one of the big big problems is the idea that we have to deal with correlations. You know, it's not only to say that I have stochastic demands, in reality, I probably have stochastic demands that display significant level of correlation. And how can we model this properly? So that's certainly an issue when we're looking at trying to coordinate vehicles as Julia is doing. Well, obviously, if we have vehicles at different levels that do not have reliable travel times, well, this means that synchronization becomes a lot more difficult, and waiting times might be skyrocketing. So there is certainly one thing for sure is if you're looking at all these problems, is that you don't have to worry about the well drying out. There's going to be work to do for many years in front of you. And I'm sharp on time at 11. So
Yeah, thank you. Thanks
back
a
to
lot.
you, Renata.
Thanks a lot, Michel. I noticed that in our chat there are also some questions. So let's do something like that. I just share for the last slide. I share my my screen for the last. You can see it. Just to let you know about our last event. We have a winter event that is scheduled for December. And in particular, what is going to happen is to present essentially the new cohort of Young Women 4OR. So just to let you know, people here, that the application is still open. So if you want, just go ahead and apply for this new cohort. For the rest, just let you know that we are issuing the new newsletter. The newsletter will be in December, just telling everyone what has been done during this year. And just keep in touch. This is our website, the email if you want to get in touch with us, and of course join us in LinkedIn just to be aware of all the updates about the events and what else. I want also to thank, I didn't share the screen, so let me move down. Thank you the panelists, of course, Michel Gendreau and all the girls, Julia, Lange, Layla, and Philine, and of course, who helped me with the support here in preparing the webinar. So Nunzia, Consuelo, and Ozgen and Tatiana. So thanks to everyone.